Okay, well, continuing on the somewhat journal. Oh my god, Mooney is here, just gonna drive me nuts at my feet. He does this while I'm sitting here. He starts to really torture me. But today was a day of rain, drizzle, pretty serious lightning storms. Some tornadoes ripped through Arkansas. We're all in coronavirus shut down Sunday. Another day there's no mass. And the date is March 29th. And I made two quiches today. That's good. Got my zippy cartoons in a nicer framing up there. I did silly stuff. And to continue the article on Edith, in expectations that we will open. And this is Darrow learns about them from Sophie. The Furloughs themselves, he a painter, she a magazine writer, rose before him in all their incorruptible simplicity, an elderly New England couple with vague yearnings for enfranchisement, who lived in Paris as if it were a Massachusetts suburb, and dwelt hopefully upon the higher side of the Gallic nature. With equal vividness, she set before him the component figures of the circle from which Mrs. Farlow drew the inner glimpses of French life appearing over her name in a leading New England journal. The Romanian lady who had sent them tickets for her tragedy, an elderly French gentleman who, on the strength of a week's stay at Folkestone, translated English fiction for the provincial press, a lady from Wichita, Kansas, who advocated free love and the abolition of the corset, a clergyman's widow from Torquay who had written An English Lady's Guide to Foreign Galleries, and a Russian sculptor who lived on nuts and was almost certainly an anarchist. It was this nucleus, and here we go, outer ring of musical architecture and other American students, which posed successfully to Mrs. Farlow's versatile fancy as a center of university life, a salon of the Faubourg Saint-Germain, a group of Parisian intellectuals, or a cross-section of Montmartre. Many aspects of life are lumped together here. Some, like free love, vegetarianism, and political activism, are very characteristic of Bohemian society. Wharton also takes potshots at some subjects, such as guidebooks to foreign galleries written by a clergyman's widow, which sounds anything but Bohemian, unless this is a veiled reference to erotic art. The point is that Mrs. Farlow's indiscriminate lumping together of such diverse beliefs is itself an indictment of Bohemian outlook. A fear expressed in the reef is that chateau life, France, can show itself just as tolerant of the loose behavior that is associated with the pervasive influence of Bohemianism in the Latin Quarter of Paris. The verdict is that of Adelaide Painter, who, in the condescending fashion of the expatriate imperialists, looks down on the people native to the country she has decided to occupy. She assesses the likely consequences if Owen, Anna's stepson, is parted from Sophie, her daughter's governess, and forced to marry someone considered more suitable. You might hustle him into that kind of marriage. I dare say you could. But if I know Owen, the natural thing would happen before the baby was weaned. Do you think it would be odious? Oh, wait. Do you think it would be. What is this language? Okay. Do you think it would be odious of him to return to his real love when he had been forcibly parted from her? At any rate, is it what your French friends do? Every one of them? Only they don't generally have the grace to go back to an old love. Adelaide Painter is presented in a number of contrasting lights, and it is unclear how we are to read her. At first, she is a figure of fun, the stereotyped expatriate Francophobe who is more American than Americans who still live in the United States, but she seems direct and efficient, and Anna seems happy to have her as an ally. She describes Adelaide's views in a light and airy fashion. She detests the French so that she'd back up Owen even if she knew something or knew too much of Miss Viner. She somehow regards the match as a protest against the decadent European a match as a protest against the corruption of European morals. Sometimes this attack on decadent Europe seems part of a Protestant anti-Catholic agenda. At other times, it seems part of a more specific American belief in the superiority of New York society, which is both more moral and more energetic. There is the same ambiguity about Europe and Americans in Europe that we find in James's novel such as Daisy Miller, where Daisy is cut by her fellow Americans and most fully understood by an Italian. Daisy's unconventional behavior is misread as bohemianism when it is really the product of a directness and freshness that higher society finds embarrassing and unacceptable. We see Bohemia at its most unsettling through the eyes of Anna Leith, while she visits Sophie's sister Laura at the end of the novel. When? But it is through the American Sophie herself that we have the novel's most cautionary message about the dissent that may follow from experimenting with bohemian ways, a dissent which begins in a very specific place. Chelsea. Sophie spent 5 years in London in what Darrow recalls is the awful house in Chelsea, as one of the dumb appendages of the shrieking, inescapable Mrs. Murat. Chelsea has long been associated with bohemianism, and in the late Victorian period achieved a certain notoriety by writers and artists in the Victorian and Edwardian periods. George Eliot, Whistler, Turner, and Dante Gabriel Rossetti all occupied houses in Cheyne Walk. Thomas Carlyle, Oscar Wilde, and John Singer Sargent had lived on Cheyne Road, just off Cheyne Walk. Chelsea is also where Herminia Barton, the title character of Grant Allen's The Women Who Did, that was written in 1895, consumes her first free union. With its quaint pockets of bohemianism, Hey, with its quaint.
That micro writing.
I
Oh,
can't
oh, sorry,
read
sorry,
it.
sorry.
I'm recording an article. Oh, where the hell am I? With its quaint pockets of bohemianism, Chelsea also depicted in a reassuringly safe manner by Arthur Ransom of Bohemia in London, 1907, and it was a place frequented by the epitome of British bohemianism, the painter Augustus John, by 1909. Perhaps the most immediate reason why this district was in the forefront of Wharton's mind at this time was that her friend James, who was hardly a bohemian, but who had written about the decadence of bohemian life in The Ambassadors, was living and writing his autobiography there. Sophie Viner is thus placed in the context of Chelsea's reputation for bohemian society. But like Vance Weston in The Gods Arrive, she is not yet corrupted by it. How could such a face have been merged in the mob, muses Darrow, who imagines Sophie in a ruff with a rose behind her ear, taking part in an Italian comedy? Such an observation may be a consciously superficial reading of Sophie, a repetition of the kind of projection of male fantasy visited on Lily Bart by Selden in The House of Mirth. It is a project it is a projection evident in The Woman Who Did, where Hermania is described as wearing a curious oriental looking navy blue robe and some soft woolen stuff that fell in natural folds and set off to the utmost the lissom grace of her molded figure. Advanced as she is in her views on free unions, Herminia is not one of the new women who reject motherhood as well as marriage, however. Her portrayal allows Ellen to reaffirm conventional views on child rearing and roles of women. It's a long article. I don't even know what the hell it means. One more quote, then we'll pause it. Every good woman is by nature a mother and finds best in maternity her social and moral salvation. She shall be saved in childbearing. Herminia was far removed indeed from that blatant and decadent set of advanced women who talk as though motherhood were a disgrace and a burden, instead of being, as it is, the full realization of a woman's faculties, the natural outlet for a woman's wealth of emotion. And we pause on page 194.